done. Okay. So I guess in about a minute or so, y'all should be able to see it if you're looking on there. Is that good?
Yeah, sounds very good.
Yeah. There's a minute delay, so we'll see. We're testing some stuff out.
I thought somebody said something crazy.
No. So let's see. Brother Sharif is here. Brother Kyle, Brother Kelvin, Brother Suleiman, and Jafar, and myself. So let's see. So I guess we're a handful plus an extra thumb. So put that to the side. Huh? Yeah, we don't. Oh, Yusuf.
Yeah.
I don't need to hit record on the camcorder, and this will still stream and be recorded on whatever, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you don't have to record. If you can see the video on that device, then it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's recording, so it's there. Okay, good. Let me know when y'all can see me.
Yeah, I'll just keep refreshing the page.
Okay. So, yeah, and then we'll get started in a minute when y'all can see me. And if y'all can't see me, we'll get started anyway.
I see you.
Okay. So it is coming.
Holding your phone and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll just put it down here this way. Can y'all hear me there?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Okay, so you can hear me. Okay, good. So,
You see it live on from your computer? Yes. I'm looking at the live tab. I don't see it yet.
maybe you need to refresh.
I am. I'm refreshing it. I just feel like this is 20. That was 26 minutes ago. I'm going to send you a WhatsApp message with the direct link. I just sent it. So. Oh, okay.
Okay. So, I guess, am I there? So inshallah, we'll go and get started anyway. Last week we spoke about Laylatul Bara or Shab Barat, and kind of focused more on hadith aspect of things because that's where the issue comes up with the way people kind of try to attack it. We spoke about the different aspects of hadith. So, and I'm not going to go, there are other things that we may end up mentioning, and I might mention some of them today, about hadith in general. But like I said at the end of last week's class, we'll start off this week with questions, since usually it ends up I ramble for a while, and by the end there's no time for anything. But, so are there, I guess more specifically, are there any questions related to last week and any questions related to what's coming up, which is, of course, Ramadan?
So, for Ramadan, is there, I know with fasting and when we not sleep, read the Quran more, things like that, but it's like, is there certain things we should be like trying to memorize and study, like as far as surahs or du'as or anything like that, anything in particular that we should try to focus on too?
Yeah. So he's asking, is there anything in particular or anything specific, like in Ramadan, other than the general do more good and stay away from all the evil? Is there anything more specific for Ramadan that we need to be doing? And that, really gets more to an individual level. Need to work on your own weaknesses. Everybody's weaknesses aren't the same. And kind of work on strengthening those weaknesses and and kind of looking at it from that perspective. And that's where, you have to take the time to kind of look into yourself and see what the issues are. It helps to have somebody else also looking at you, letting you know what your issues are. And a lot of us, we know what they are, we just don't acknowledge them. And so that's one aspect of it. And of course, asking for Allah's forgiveness. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the certain things that you can't do without, and one of those is asking for Allah's forgiveness. And that's also why, like when Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu anha, the wife of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the mother of the believers, when she asked him about Laylatul Qadr specifically, and asked, if I find that night, then what should I do? So he told her to Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum bi rahmatika astaghith, which means Ya Hayyu Ya Qayyum, the living, O living and powerful, have mercy and forgiveness upon me. And also where he said, another narration where he says that the dua that he told her was basically, "Oh Allah, you love to forgive, and I need your forgiveness, so forgive me." And the other aspect of Ramadan, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that whoever goes through Ramadan without attaining Allah's forgiveness, is wretched. So again, like we talked about earlier when we talked about Shab Barat, every night, last third of the night, he's calling out, "Is there anyone who wants forgiveness that I may forgive him? Is there anyone who needs sustenance that I may give him more sustenance?" And this is a call that he makes every night. But like Laylatul Bara, Laylatul Qadr, that call starts from the beginning of the night until Fajr. But Ramadan, again, everybody knows that in Ramadan everything increases. So, whatever good you do, if you do something optional, you get the reward of something. You get the reward of something that's obligatory. And if you do the obligatory, you get 70 times the reward. And this is a minimum. This isn't, there are those, and, a lot of this is based on sincerity. The aspect that we need to keep remembering, though, and this is why we keep talking about this here, because people will say, well, why don't you talk about, doing this and doing that? Or, doing this and doing that has no meaning if the aqidah, if the belief system is messed up. And if you look at the history of Islam, the history of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 13 years in Mecca, right? He preached for 23 years. You have 23 years of revelation of the Quran. This is when he preached when he preached, after declaration of prophethood. Even his life before was preaching. It's just, kind of preaching through example. Okay? So that Quraysh, when he finally declared himself, they had no excuse. They couldn't accuse him of anything. Because normally, like, somebody, you see this, somebody has issues in the past, and suddenly now they become righteous and they're talking to somebody else, and that person's always going to bring up, well, you used to do this, you used to do that, what about this? They had nothing on him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So for 40 years, they're seeing him, in front of their eyes, and now when he declares himself, declares the prophethood, suddenly now they got an issue, but they have nothing, they have no basis or no foundation to base those issues on. Because they're the ones who gave him the title of Sadiq al-Amin and all of these other things. They're the ones who, even before the declaration of prophethood and even after the declaration of prophethood, they are the ones, the people who wanted to kill him, who, if they had something valuable to keep safe, where would they go? They go to him. Because they knew nothing would happen to it. Not even, they knew that if they gave it to their relatives, they're probably going to do something. Okay? But there was utmost trust there, except when it came to this. Okay? So now for 13 years in Mecca, this is what we talked about Friday as well. There are no quote-unquote deeds to be done other than believing in Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and all of that entails, which means loving Him above yourself and above everything else, and loving the ones that he loves. And so this is, so the actions didn't come until the last 10 years, and then they came piece by piece. So like even, like fasting specifically, wasn't until the second year of Hijrah that the obligation came. Okay, now you got to fast. Okay, in Ramadan. And it wasn't until the next year that there was a modification in how to fast. And that's, like I said, we'll talk about that in Jummah, inshallah. So the modification came, then like Hajj. Hajj wasn't an obligation until like the last couple of years of the Prophet ﷺ preaching. Before that, it wasn't an obligation. So all of these obligations came later because the obligations and all these other aspects of the actions, they have no meaning unless the aqidah is proper. And this is also why we find a hadith in Mustadrak. Mustadrak is a compilation of hadith that was gathered by Imam Hakim. Imam Hakim Abdullah Nishapuri. Hakim is his title. And as we said last week when we talked about hadith, we said Hafiz, as far as hadith is concerned, somebody memorized 100,000 hadiths. Hujjah, or Hujjat, is someone who memorized 300,000 hadiths. Hakim is someone who's memorized 1,200,000 hadiths, 1.2 million hadiths. So again, this isn't a title that we gave him. This was a title that the muhaddiseen, those who are scholars of hadith, gave him. And he compiled a book called Mustadrak. And the reason Mustadrak is significant is that Mustadrak, the criteria that he used as far as which hadith he selected for that book, is the same criteria that Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim used for their sahih, for their authentic narrations. If you look at the chain of narrators, it's also the same that we find in Bukhari and Muslim. So it's the same people narrating. And in there is a narration where Rasulullah ﷺ talks about a man who fasts every day, and he makes salat, all night, and he's making salat in front of the Kaaba, and he dies in sajda. And everybody, if we talk about anybody and he died while he was making salat, he died while he was doing this good action, and so that must be a good omen. He must be someone who's going to paradise. And this is somebody who again has donned the cloak of piety. You look at him from the outward aspect. Again, he's fasting every day. He's praying all the prayers plus additional prayers. He's praying in front of the Kaaba, and he's making sajda, and he dies in that sajda. And yet Rasulullah says he goes directly to hell. And one thing we need to also understand is when Rasulullah gave us examples like these aren't just something he pulled out or something metaphorical. Just like when he says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, actions are by their intentions. But he doesn't stop here, and we've talked about this many times. He goes on, he says, whoever made hijrah, or emigrated for Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, emigrated for Allah and His Messenger. And whoever immigrated that he may marry some woman or some other worldly gain, that is what he immigrated for. Well, the reason he says that is because there was somebody who immigrated because he wanted to marry some woman. Alright. So the same thing here. He's talking about this man who's dying in sajda in front of the Kaaba, which means this is an actuality. But it also gives us a generality, because he says he goes straight to hell. And why does he go straight to hell? Because he has animosity against the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he says that. So, and it's because of these types of narrations, like I said last week, that a lot of people, not a lot of people, but certain groups or certain people will try to label Imam Hakim as being Shia, which of course he was not. And then of course the way they convince people, see, he's from Nishapur. Nishapur is, right there on that border with Iran. So see, Iran is Shia. Iran didn't become Shia until a couple of hundred years ago. Before that, all those scholars were Sunni. Iran was Sunni. You look at all these traditional Muslim scholars who are from Iran. You know, even Muhaddithin, Ibn Majah, Abu Dawud, they're from Iran. The others are from Khurasan. So you don't, if you look at the 6 major books of hadith that people talk about, well, 4 of them are from Khurasan, and 2 of them are from Iran. None of them are from Arabia. Okay? Which is just kind of interesting. And so the biggest thing we need to work on, all of us in Ramadan, is making sure that our intention is clear, and also to keep working on our iman, because it used to be, again, when the people's belief system became solid, that's when the action started coming. Unfortunately, in today's society, the belief systems have become corrupted again, and that's why we keep emphasizing those things here, is because if that foundation isn't solid, doesn't matter what you put on top of it. And that's something that's constantly being attacked. So we need to constantly be working on that. So Ramadan is just another excuse, something we need to be working on all year round, but Ramadan, another point to focus on. But again, and while you're doing that, then when you start adding the additional things like recitation of Quran, making zikr, and making more salat and doing all these things more, then it has some meaning. And even like with the recitation of Quran, and this again, we've talked about this a lot, and we will keep talking about this point, inshallah. And the reason I keep mentioning this particular hadith is because I can say that as a generality, and people will say, oh, you're just making this up. But here, okay, this is a hadith, it's from Sahih Muslim. When Jabir radhiyallahu anhu asked Yazid al-Walid, who just quoted the Quran to him, he asked him, instead of quoting some other verses of the Quran to counter his argument, that because Yazid was making an argument, Yazid al-Walid Yazid al-Faqir was making an argument that was un-Islamic, using the Quran. He didn't counter his argument with other verses of the Quran. He simply asked him, have you read the Quran? And of course he's going to say yes. And he said yes. He said, well, if you read it, then you understand the status and the exalted position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed His beloved, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if we're reading the Quran, whether it's in a Ramadan or even outside of Ramadan, if we're and of course the Quran, or Ramadan is the month of the Quran. Shahru Ramadan alladhi unzila fihi al-Quran hudan lin-nas. The month of in which the Quran was revealed. Allah mentions that in verse 185, the beginning of verse 185 of Surah Baqarah. So the Quran and the Ramadan are connected. But if we're reading the Quran and all we're getting out of it is that, the Prophet, he didn't have any authority and he couldn't do this and he didn't know this or didn't know that, we're not really reading the Quran. At least not by this, not by what Jabir radhiyallahu, who was a very close companion of Rasulullah said. Yeah, if you read the Quran, then you would understand his exalted position. Because again, if you're reading the Quran, that's what it's talking about. Again, everything's about connections, and if we don't have that connection, then nothing matters. So like for some of us, anger is an issue. For some of us, ego, or anger also comes into ego as well. So all of these things are connected. For some of us, we're lazy. For some of us, some other issues. So whatever issue it is, we need to be focusing on that as well, while we're doing everything else.
What are the additional salats called?
Nawafil. Nawafil is plural for nafil. So he's asking what the additional salats are called, and so any additional deed is nafil. It's optional. It's the best way to translate it. So you can say, oh Allah, my intention is to make 2 rakat, optional prayer. So anything optional is nafil. Nawafil is the plural of that. Okay. Anything else?
I got one more. Oh, that when we during Ramadan, when we recite the Quran after every 8th.
After every 4. It's not Quran as a dua. So after Taraweeh, the question is after Taraweeh. So in between every 4 rakats, we make the dua, which is printed over there. Subhanallah. سبحان ذي الملك والملكوت سبحان ذي العزة والعزمة والهيبة والقدرة والكبرياء والجبروت سبحان الملك الحي الذي لا ينام ولا يموت سبوه قدوس ربنا ورب الملائكة والروح اللهم أجرنا من النار يا مجير يا مجير يا مجير, which means glorified is the owner of the kingdom of the earth and heavens. Glorified is the possessor of honor and magnificence and awe and power and greatness and omnipotence. Glorified is the sovereign, the living, who does neither sleep nor die. O all glorious, all holy one, our Lord and the Lord of the angels and the soul, or Ruh. Ruh here means Gabriel or Jibreel. O our Allahumma jinna min nar. O Allah, save us from the fire of the hell. O Savior, O Savior, O Savior. So we say that in between every 4 rakat. So, we make 2 rakat and then we stand up and we make another 2 rakat. And then after that second 2 rakat, then we make the dua and then we resume.
Is there a reason behind that one, or is that one particular, or?
This is the one, I don't know if this is from like a particular hadith or what. But this is, kind of one of those. This is the thing that the Muslims have been doing from the beginning, because there's even mention of it, like Umar bin Abdul Aziz, that I do know. And the reason I'm not saying, I don't want to kind of assume, because again, I don't know exactly what narration this comes through. I do know that Umar bin Abdul Aziz refers to it at one point, and so he's very early on. And it's like sort of like when we're talking about the hadith, where Imam Tirmizi, when he talks about the hadith, when he narrates the hadith of taking a ghusl or taking a bath on the day of Eid al-Adha and Eid al-Fitr, he says, yeah, the narration is weak, but this has been the practice of the Muslims from the beginning. So that also, it's sort of like, it's precedence. Yeah. One more?
I'm good.
You good? Jaffer says it's boring when you're not here, so. Any questions from y'all on the phone? Because if they're not, then I'll go over another aspect with the hadith that I didn't go over last week. I guess not, so I'll go over that then, inshallah. And this is what a lot of people forget, and we, so kind of summarize what we talked about last week. You had various categorizations of hadith, and then you have, like I said, and I keep repeating these because we need to remember them. Hadith, Ahsan al-Hadith, which is the Quran. Hadith Qudsi, which is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, but it's not Quran. Hadith Qawli, Qawl, is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying. Hadith Fa'li is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is doing. And then Hadith Taqriri is what the companions saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or what the companions did in front of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or said in front of him, and he did not object. So his silence becomes law. But then you have the categorizations of this group, okay, those narrations that have been passed down. The Quran is the Quran, so no doubt. No one has any doubt on that. And anyone who does is not Muslim. But then the other hadiths, you can say, okay, well, who heard it from who? and is that person reliable? And so you have there, different categorizations of what's known as sahih, which means that the matan, which is the body of the hadith, the text of the hadith, the wording is right. This is the way that Prophet ﷺ spoke, or things. So that aspect is correct or reliable. And then every person who narrated it one person who said he heard it from somebody else. They're contemporaries. So it's not like, I'm hearing it from somebody who died 100 years before I was born. That's not going to work. And that the people are reliable. They are righteous in appearance. So they made their salat. They weren't known to lie. And on top of that, also their memory is good. So it's not like they mix words. And then you have, below that is Hasan, where, maybe there's one slight issue with something, somebody's questionable, or we don't really know much about this particular person. So it's not Sahih, but it's Hasan. Hasan and Sahih hadith are the ones that can be used for deriving ahkam, which means halal and haram. Then below that you have daif. Daif means weak. Doesn't mean it's not hadith. It just simply means that there's a question with either the wording or the chain. In that, so and so, they were righteous and not known to tell lies, but their memory wasn't good. So maybe they made a mistake in the narration. Or, there's a break where Tabi directly says that Rasulullah said or did something. Well, he wasn't there during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So how can he say that? So, but when you have like multiple weak hadiths, one weakness can be corrected from, like, this hadith is weak because of this one particular reason. Well, this hadith is also weak, but it doesn't have that fault. It's got something else. So one can compensate for the other in that manner. And then you have what are known as mawdu. Mawdu means, this is something somebody made up. Like the aspect of a particular hadith that they talk about the Prophet ﷺ going to commit suicide. Astaghfirullah. He's going to jump off the mountain. Or talking about the Prophet ﷺ having lice. Astaghfirullah. So these are things that are, it's like, who came up with this? Okay. And there are many others. So these are all different kinds. So mawdu is the one that's, this is fabricated. This is something somebody injected in. It has no credibility at all. Even the daif hadiths have some credibility. But they can't be used for ahkam. So they can't be used to declare something halal or haram. But they can be used for virtue. If I'm talking about the virtue of a particular night, the virtue of a particular person, there's nothing wrong with using a weak hadith in that aspect. Okay. And then there are multiple narrations, like which Imam Tirmizi, he said, the hadith is weak, but this has been the practice of the believers from the beginning. And this is why Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayhi, he said that part of the criteria, the normal criteria for making a ruling is, Quran, the Sunnah, which means the hadiths, the narrations, and all of that. Ijma, which is consensus. And ijma is not a common thing. People try to make it more common than it is. Ijma means that there's a consensus of the rightly guided scholars whose aqidah is correct and whose practices are correct. They agree upon something. And they all say, this is my opinion, and all the opinions are the same. That's ijma. That also becomes law. And so that is also a criteria for law. And then you have qiyas. Qiyas means, I can't find anything directly related to this in the Quran and the Sunnah, but I do find these things that kind of I can draw an analogy to. So there is a connection, but it's not a direct. It's not like, this isn't the exact same incident that happened, but this is similar to this other incident that happened, so I can use that to help formulate the law in this. So that's qiyas. But Imam Malik also said that what the people of Medina Munawwara during his time did, because he was at the end of the time of the Tabi'i, those who saw the companions. So the people of Medina are the people at that time were the people who saw the companions of Rasulullah. So they saw what they did. They were emulating what they did. So he said, whatever they do can also be used as law. Okay. The other Imams were not in Medina Munawwara, so they didn't use that. Like Imam Abu Hanifa was in Kufa, Imam Malik was in Kufa, Imam Shafi was Kufa, and then he ended up in Egypt, and Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal was in Baghdad and that area in Iraq as well. Okay. So that's basically a summary of what I said last week. Okay. The other thing that has to be understood, the only reason I have to say this is because people throw out hadith all the time now. You know, in the past, when you look at the scholars, they were very careful when they talked about hadith. And now, of course, they throw it out, throw it in your face, make a ruling off of it, and the ruling is basically what they've done is they've distorted the hadith to fit their agenda. So when I look at hadith in general, you have to understand the timeline, that these hadiths were being compiled, and what the pressures of the time were, because basically you have the hadith the hadith compilers, the muhaddithin. So Imam Bukhari, Imam Muslim, and all of these, they didn't start compiling this until the time of Banu Abbas. So Banu Umayyah, their reign ended 132. For the most part, with the exception of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, rahmatullahi, all of them were tyrants, or oppressive kings rather. They were kings. We're in the age of tyrants now. And then 132, their reign ended, and now you have Banu Abbas. And so, Imam Bukhari, of course, is 200 and something Hijri. So this is even a few generations into Banu Abbas. But kings are kings, rulers are rulers, and they have their own agendas. That's why the Khilafah is something that is very different, in fact, totally different. Because the Khilafah is looking out for what is good for the people. Rulers and kings and tyrants are looking out for whatever is good for themselves. So you have this brainwashing that occurred during the time of Banu Umayyah, that you have to follow your leader. There's a verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأَتِيُوا اللَّهَ وَأَتِيُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. Obey Allah and obey the messenger and obey the leaders appointed over you. So they abuse this. The obedience of Allah and His messenger is absolute. If somebody, if Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told somebody do this, and they disobeyed, so he gave them a direct order, and they said, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do something else, that's disbelief. So the obedience of Allah and His messenger is absolute. If Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says something in general, and somebody out of his weakness isn't able to comply, that's a different issue. But to reject the order, or to challenge the order, like somebody might say, well, what about the archers in the Battle of Uhud? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave them a direct order, stay on the mountain, no matter what. 40 of them ended up leaving, and then you ended up having this, the whole situation of the battle turning upside down. Okay. But when those who left, when I look at them, they didn't leave, because they were unpleased with the order of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they were challenging his order, or or out of animosity against the order. They simply reasoned incorrectly. that, oh, the order was only for the time that, the battle was taking place and the battle's over. So that's very different than he gives me a direct order and I said, no, you're wrong. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something else. Okay? So the obedience of Allah and His Messenger is absolute. The obedience of the leaders appointed over us is conditional. Based off of, are they following the first two or not? So and this gets to a narration where one time Rasulullah SAW sent out an expedition. And he assigned one of the companions as the leader of the expedition. And on the way there, the Amir or the leader became very upset with his people under him for whatever reason. So he orders them to gather some wood and to light it on fire. So they gather the wood, lit it on fire. Then he ordered them to jump into it. So, so they started looking at each other, and they all of them agreed, we're not jumping into the fire. But we'll ask the messenger. If he tells us we should have jumped into the fire, we'll jump into the fire. So they come back and they ask Rasulullah SAW that this is what happened and this is what he told us. And this is so what should we have done? And his response to them was that whoever had jumped in would have remained there forever, which means that he would be in hell. So again, the obedience of the leaders is subject to them being obedient to Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. But these leaders, and this is the same thing that we see in various Muslim countries, Saudi particularly, where the brainwashing is, oh, you got to follow the leader. And they pull out various fatwas and they use them incorrectly or misquote various fatwas from the past. And their fatwa, their modern day fatwa is, doesn't matter whether the leader is, that the leader is committing zina in his tent every night, you still got to follow him. You still got to obey him. And you can't do anything against him. And so this is something that was pushed by Banu Umayyah. And then Banu Abbas, of course, being kings, it's great thing. We can use this as well. Same thing that they're using. So they mandated all these things, and they also started mandating as far as the compilation of hadith. So if you look in all of the books of hadith, whenever you'll see the name of Rasulullah SAW mentioned, you'll say, Qala Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. None of them say, Qala Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam. What's the difference? One is, blessings upon Allah's blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon the messenger, and the other is blessings upon the messenger and his family. Okay, so Banu Abbas mandated that you couldn't write that, because the way Banu Abbas came to power was that they basically, Banu Umayyah was causing a lot of atrocities against the believers, and especially against the household of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Banu Abbas, being the cousins to the household, they said, oh, we're going to overthrow them and we're going to fix things. And they made an allegiance with Imam Muhammad Nafs Zakiyah, the great grandson of Imam Hassan al-Islam, and they gave him allegiance at the graveside of the mother of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when we take over or when we overthrow them, we will hand over the rule to you. Of course, when they were overthrown, with the support of the people, and the people are supporting them because, oh, these are the people that are going to fix these atrocities against the household of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when they overthrew them, though, what do? Who are you? We don't know you. What allegiance? We're the kings now. Okay. So they had to keep things, they had to keep people's, if they were allowed sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam, then people would start questioning, what about the household? See? So they mandated this, you can't write this. So that's why when you look throughout all the books, you don't see that at all. There were some scholars who said, no, we will write this, but they were killed. Or their books were not pushed forward. So that's one thing to remember. So you have all these mandates from above, and if someone doesn't comply, these were ruthless kings. Chopping somebody's head off was not, that was child's play for them. This was, I don't like the way you looked at me. And if you look at Hajjaj, literally, if somebody looked at him wrong, he would have them executed, or execute him himself. So this wasn't like, this was, these were decent people. And when it comes to keeping your chair, your power, nothing was off limits for them. So the other thing that people forget is paper is a commodity. Before that, all the writing was done on skins or the shoulder blades of camels, or you have papyrus, but you don't have much of that either. So paper had just come into being in Arabia, because at the end of the power, at the reign of Banu Umayyah, they had a war with the Chinese, and they caught some of the Chinese people who knew how to make paper and brought them over and had them start making paper. Well, again, it's a commodity. It's not like, like we use paper for everything, and we, without thinking, we just, tear a paper towel and, kind of dry my hands just a little bit and toss it away. Right? Everything's paper. That wasn't the case there. So that's also why they had to kind of be diligent about what they were writing, other than government control. So when you look at like Imam Bukhari, and you look at the various hadiths that he's narrated, you'll find within them where he summarizes certain things. He won't go into details, because he knows if he goes into details, just like with YouTube now. If I say the wrong thing, what happens? You get demonetized, you get tossed off, you get a warning, you get this, you get that, right? Same thing with all the other platforms. So you got to understand the same thing's going on. What's going on today, it's only, today it's digital. Back then it was paper. But it's the same thing. So you have the censors, and the people in power are going to be doing the censoring, and dictating, okay, what you can and you can't say. Now the interesting thing, one point that's interesting here is, even though they dictated you couldn't say sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, well, the hadith that says that, where Rasulullah sallallahu says that the durood or the blessings upon him are not complete unless the family is included, is in Sahih Bukhari. So he slipped that in. Okay. But you'll see other places where okay, yeah, he summarized. He'll say like some places and for various reasons. Like in some places, like the companion who made a certain mistake. So he won't take the name of the companion in the hadith. He'll simply say so and so, and move on. Okay, to protect their honor. But you also have places like where when he talks about the conditions between, when the treaty was being signed between, when Imam Hassan al-Islam was handing over the rule to Muawiyah, he says that, instead of, he says that that this agreement was based on conditions, but he doesn't specify the conditions. And the way you know that this is a summary is that you go to other hadiths and you'll see that laid out. So okay, he summarized this here in these words. Otherwise, okay, there's going to be backlash from the authorities. and the authorities were ruthless. And their, I guess, decision to do this was based on at least the knowledge will get through. Because otherwise, if we don't do this, then the concern was that the knowledge wouldn't move on. So when we're looking at that, you have to be careful with that. You know, the other thing that you have to be careful with also is, you know, since, you know, most of us are reading translations, well, is the translation even correct? Because same thing with the Quran. You know, could that word have been translated differently? And so you also have to look at things in context as to who's being spoken about. So those are important things to understand, and especially, you know, when people, again, these are things that we shouldn't even have to talk about, but we have to talk about them because, you know, you listen to anybody, you know, and they start throwing out stuff. And if you don't understand the context of what's being thrown out, you know, it's very easy to get misled. You know, the deception is very deep. Any questions?
Yeah, one day popped in my head before you started talking, fasting.
Yes.
Okay, well, you fast if you say you missed a fast, is it 60 consecutive days? And then you get sick, something like that, then feeding an orphan. How does that tie in? Like,
yeah, he's asking about fasting, so if you know, it kind of depends on why you missed the fast. Okay. So, you know, if you look at the verses on fasting, they are in Surah Baqarah verses 183 through 188. So 6 verses only that talk about Ramadan. Okay. And so he's asking about, you know, missing the fast. There's a difference in missing the fast and breaking the fast on purpose. Okay. And, you know, they're two very different things, and the compensation is very different for both of them. Okay. So now, like, you know, it starts off, of course, with Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, so I'm just going to kind of go over the verses dealing with what you asked. Okay, so the second verse, 184, ayyaman ma'dudat, you know, fasting for a fixed number of days. فَمَنْ كَانَ مِنْكُمْ مَرِيدًا أَوْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ فَعِدَّةٌ مِّنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. But if any of you is ill or on a journey, the prescribed number should be made up from days later. Okay, so, you know, like, let's say I'm traveling, I can't fast, you know, or I get sick and I can't fast. And that's also kind of a very relative thing, because I've heard a lot of people tell me that, oh, you know, I'm diabetic, so I can't fast. Which, you know, for most diabetics, that's the furthest thing from the truth. You know, most diabetics need to be fasting. You have a very small percentage of diabetics who are truly brittle diabetics who shouldn't be fasting. Okay, and then, you know, but you know, so there are a lot of people who come up with an excuse that I can't fast. You know, my toe hurts. Okay. You know, I mean, something that's kind of from a medical standpoint, that's ridiculous. And of course, they go to this Christian or this non-Muslim doctor who has no concept of fasting. You know, and he that doctor who's got a belly that big, you know, who tells them that, oh, you know, if you don't eat, you're gonna die. Yeah. So, you know, but, you know, again, me, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. There are certain illnesses where, yeah, you don't need to be fasting. You know, but a lot of minor illnesses, you're better off fasting. And you think about it, you know, the body tries to fix itself, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created a system. So what happens? You know, you get a bacteria or you get a virus in you, what happens? The temperature goes up. Why do you get a temperature? What's your body doing? Bacteria and viruses grow or spread at a certain fine temperature point. Your body's trying to increase that temperature to slow down the growth of the bacteria. You know, you're coughing. Why are you coughing? You got to get this stuff out of you. Which is why, you know, giving cough suppressants, you know, the only time I give cough suppressants is if somebody's coughing to such an extent they can't sleep. And then I tell them just use it at night. Because again, this is your body trying to get rid of stuff. Same thing with, like, if you got a bacterial infection, you got diarrhea. You know, unless the diarrhea is so bad that you're getting overly dehydrated, you need to let that stuff get out of you. Okay. You know, there are certain causes of the diarrhea that, yeah, you need to take something to stop the diarrhea. Same thing with the cough. You know, and if you give cough suppressant to a child under 5, you're asking for pneumonia. Okay. So, you know, unfortunately, this gets abused a lot. Oh, I'm sick. Well, I mean, you know, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says this in the end of this verse, and we'll get to that in a second. But he says, so if you're traveling or you're sick, then you make up the days later on. Okay, from the days. For those who cannot, so somebody who literally can't make it up. Okay. And one point here, as far as making it up, there's no set as to, you know, you want to make it up before the next Ramadan. Okay, but there's no set as to when you make it up. So, you know, if you miss some fasting for a legitimate reason in the summer, well, you could make it up in the winter. I mean, you know, this is just the ease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us. He didn't set, okay, you got to make it up like right away, even though it is preferred because nobody knows when death will come. So you want to make it up, you know, sooner rather than later. But again, that's not a restriction. Okay.
There are some days you should not fast, right?
Yes, and I'll go over that in a second, inshallah. Okay. So fixed number of days. Okay, prescribed days. And for those who legitimately can't do this, is a ransom. So you free somebody. Okay, or the ransom is the feeding of one that is indigent. So you feed, for every day that you missed fasting, you feed one person that day. You know, so if you missed, like if somebody is truly sick or they truly can't fast, and Ramadan is 30 days, so they feed 30 people. Okay, and that compensates for them not being able to fast. Okay. And then, you know, feeding. But he that will give more, that's the minimum, is feeding one person. He that will give more of his own free will, it is better for him. Okay. And it is better for you that ye fast if ye only knew. That's the catch here. You know, one tasumu khayrul lakum in kuntum ta'alamun. That it's better if you fasted, though. Which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says right here. Yeah, don't come up with excuses. Yeah. Because most illnesses, you know, again, you think about it, you get sick. You don't want to eat anything. You're just laying around. Right? So again, your body is telling you, okay, you need to kind of limit things. And what's Ramadan doing? It's limiting things. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us, though, if you miss one day of fasting in Ramadan, you can fast your entire life and you can't make up for it. Legit, you can't literally make up for it. You know, the blessings that you lost. There's no way to make up for that. This is simply, okay, yeah, let me kind of try to compensate. So here some people go to the extreme that, oh, you know, see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he gave us the ease that if you're fasting, you know, if you're traveling, don't fast. And they say, oh, you know, if you fast while you're traveling, it's haram. Which is not true, because if, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says at the end of that verse that it's better for you if you fasted. You know, for me, you know, there are people who, yeah, okay, when they're traveling, fasting is very hard, they can't fast. It's, you know, for me personally, you know, because I try not to eat or drink much while I'm traveling anyway, because I don't want to go to the bathroom. It's, you know, pretty simple. But yeah, I mean, I can see there are certain situations where somebody could not fast. So again, for them, feeding of someone who's indigent, that's the compensation. Okay. If I, during Ramadan, you know, I forget I'm fasting and I eat, Well, and then suddenly I remember, oh, I'm fasting. I stop eating. I don't try to make myself throw up or do this or do that. I just stop eating. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that, don't worry, Allah has fed you. Okay. So if you forgot. Okay. If, like, let's say the time to break the fast is 8:30. And, and I'm sitting there and I end up eating a date at 8:25 because my watch is wrong. And then later on I realize that my watch is wrong. I got to make up that fast, but it's only one fast to make up. Okay. Because I didn't intentionally break the fast. Okay. Now if I'm fasting and the day's hot and I got to have something to drink. Like here, I'm gonna die. It doesn't matter what's going on, I'm gonna die. Right? People think, my stomach's growling, I'm gonna die. And then I intentionally break the fast. That's where it's 60 fast continuous. And if I miss one, I gotta start all over. Okay? Because that's not a compensation, that is a punishment. For having broken the fast when you basically violating Ramadan. There are scholars who also say that if a Muslim is openly eating in Ramadan, out in public eating, the punishment for them is just death. Because that's a violation. Because somebody's not praying. Well, I don't know if he prayed or didn't pray. Somebody's openly eating in Ramadan. Because even if I'm sick and the fast is not an obligation on me, for whatever reason, I should eat, in secret. Everybody knows, okay, I'm not fasting because of my issues, but I shouldn't be out in the public, smacking away that stuff. Okay. There are certain days when it is forbidden to fast. So the days of Eid. So Eid al-Adha, Eid al-Fitr, and the last day of Shaban. So the last day of Shaban, which would be like the 29th of Shaban maybe 30 days. But what you don't want to do is what they call fasting of shak, basically kind of doubtful fast. Somebody said, well, it might be Ramadan. No. Ramadan it starts when you see the moon. And if you haven't gotten, clear, announcement, or rather clear evidence of the sighting of the moon, well, then you just finish 30 days of Shaban. So it's not like, well, it might be Shaban. Now, for those who don't normally fast, like people fast Monday and Thursday, or they'll fast various days, someone who doesn't do that, the scholars say that even after the 15th of Shaban, they shouldn't fast, to distinguish that from Ramadan. And these are the rulings for men, and of course for women, when they're having their cycle, of course they're not going to fast, but they got to make up the fast. Okay. When they're having their cycle and they don't make salat either, but they don't make up the salat. So, but they got to make up the fast later on.
With the fasting, like I said, I mean, if we get like our mouth get dry, we could like rinse our mouth out with water, but that's it, right?
Yeah. So, like, what breaks the fast is the question was, for if y'all didn't hear it, like, can we rinse our mouth out? And you make wudu. What are you doing? You're still rinsing your mouth. Okay. But you're not taking it in. You're simply rinsing it out. So yeah, so if you get something dirty, like a little something came up. If you're vomiting a lot, then that does break the fast. But a little something comes up and you spit it out and you want to rinse your mouth out. and then there's nothing wrong with that. Your mouth gets a little dry, or and getting dry really, it'd be better preferred to do that minimally. But when you make wudu, and there are no limits on making wudu. And actually, wudu is interesting. Like we make wudu and we make multiple salat with one wudu. Yeah, that wasn't allowed until the last year, until the 9th year of Hijrah. Before that, you had to make a fresh wudu for every salat. And then after that, it became allowed that you could make more than one salat with one wudu. So, again, when you make wudu, you're rinsing your mouth. But the other, if you look at fasting, it's, as far as what violates the fast, there are multiple things, but this is from something entering the body. Anything that enters a cavity in the body will break the fast. So, this is why, like putting eye drops in, unless you know what you're doing, which, it's going to break the fast. Because what that does is that enters into the duct here at the bottom of the eye, and it goes into the sinuses, which goes into the cavities in the body. The scholars give an extreme example of this. If somebody cut had a skull that was cut, and somebody put something into that cavity, that would break my fast. That's an extreme example, but that kind of gives you the picture of. This is also why putting an IV in breaks the fast, because the vascular system is also a cavity. It's just full of blood. So if somebody says, "Oh no, my stomach was full, so I just added a little bit more, so it wasn't really a cavity." Well, that doesn't work. Okay.
What about like a shot for other reasons?
Yeah, it kind of depends on what the shot's for. You have as far as shots, you have what's subcutaneous, which is just underneath the skin. That's not going into a cavity. You have intramuscular, which is going into the muscle. Again, not a cavity. Okay. An IV is going into the veins or into the artery, so that's the cavity. Okay, so you can't have an IV. But as far as a shot, if you're taking like a vaccine, of course you shouldn't be taking certain vaccines, but if you're taking like a vaccine, depending, or if you're taking like an antibiotic shot, so those are things that aren't going to change certain aspects. Somebody's taking like a B12 shot. Well, that's something they could have done later on. And that's something that's going to, like a lot of scholars will say that, if it's a shot that gives you strength, which certain vitamin shots will, then yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. And that will break the fast. But if it's like, like you're sick and you got to have an antibiotic shot, then that's not going to break the fast. If you take some blood out, that won't break the fast.
And we stopped 10 minutes before Father.
Okay. Yeah. What's that? I'll get that.
I got two questions.
Okay.
One, first question is, just pardon my ignorance, but how do people season and prepare food for the house? Do people taste it, spit it out, or you just don't? You just deal with whatever you can get that during the day before you break your fast, or I don't know how that's done.
Okay.
The second one is the question about socks versus I forget what they call it, the leather things for your feet.
Oh, okay. Yeah. The kusse. Okay.
We'll do it also with house shoes, shoes that they're intended for the home. They don't leave the house. What category is that in?
Okay. Yeah. So that's actually. I'll get to those two questions in a second. Kelvin was asking about stopping 10 minutes before, for suhoor. The hadith connected to that are that the companion said that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have an adhan called. So he actually had two adhans at in the morning, and they would stop eating in enough time that they could recite 100 verses of the Quran before the actual adhan for Fajr was called. Okay. So a lot of scholars say roughly that's 10 minutes. Right. Because of course, if you're reading verses from Surah Baqarah, that's going to be a lot longer. If you're reading Surah Waqiah, that's 6 minutes. So roughly 10 minutes. Okay, that's the rough gauge. But so that's why they say, okay, stop 10 minutes before. As far as the breaking of the fast, when the sun sets, but you also want to make sure that the sun has set. And that's why here, like the sunset time, we will add a few minutes to it. Because the sunset time can vary depending on the atmospheric conditions as well. They're going by a certain calculation. And so based off of that, so that's why, we'll tend to add a few minutes to it. Okay. So if you look at like sunset time and the time that we tell people to break the fast here, there's about 3 or 4 minutes difference, and that's why. Okay. So that's one. Now to your two questions, inshallah. One was as far as seasoning of the food and stuff. There is some permissibility as far as tasting, but it's still not preferred. And most people, they in these days, they got to, okay, let me put this many teaspoons of this and that many teaspoons of that, and a cup of this and whatever of that. And of course, when you're hungry, everything tastes good anyway. So I mean, there is some leeway there as far as tasting, but again, taste. There's a big difference between tasting and eating, and this comes to kullu nafsin dha'iqatul maut. Every nafs will taste death. And for some of us, that's a very long time. For the prophets, they simply tasted it, and and that was it. They tasted. They didn't eat death. Okay, but as far as the tasting, just at the tip of your tongue, and that's it. But again, that's something that you should avoid as well, because of the possibility of taking something in. Again, like I said, most folks, they kind of have some idea as to how much of this or whatever of that to use. And even there, the permissibility of that is like for a wife who's got a husband who's strange, and he flies off the handle because the food didn't taste good, or whatever else. There are folks like that, and it's like, calm down, man. And again, if you're hungry enough, it's going to taste good anyway. But as far as the socks for wudu, couple of things here. The socks for wudu have to come above the ankles. So, simple regular shoes don't qualify, because when you're making wudu, it entails the whole foot, including the ankles. And this is something that a lot of people miss. So that's why regular shoes aren't permissible as far as doing masa on them. When you're traveling and you put on those socks, then you're allowed while you're traveling to keep those socks on for 3 days, and you can do masa on them for 3 days. And then after that, you got to take them off and do a regular wudu again, and then you can put them back on, if you're continuing your travels. If you're at home, it's only allowed for 1 day. Okay. As far as like the house shoes and stuff, doing masa on them, yeah, I mean, it depends on, are they, what do they call those? Come up here.
Ankle socks.
Yeah, well, ankle socks or whatever, if they're coming up that high, and they have to be, of course, they can't have holes in them. You can't have those holy socks. And they have to be strong enough that you can walk a decent distance without them ripping. So that's why, traditionally it was just the leather socks. The first person to say no, any sock will do was Ibn Taymiyyah. And for most folks, I don't have to elaborate on that, because just the name there. Okay, and he of course was 700 years after the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All the scholars before that said no, you can't just use any sock, because you got like a thin sock. It's you walk, go outside, walk on the sand, and it's going to rip. So it's got to be strong enough, or rather thick enough, that it can withstand some beating, so house slippers, from what most house slippers don't cover the ankles, so I don't think if it doesn't cover the ankles, then they don't fit the bill, and you can't do masa on them. If they come up to the ankles and they're strong enough, then that would be okay.
And you say you can do it at home? You can use them at home too?
You can use them at home, but only for a day.
Yeah.
So you can't use them for more than a day at home. While you're traveling, 3 days.
Well, as long as you do wudu?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so what you could do is, every morning, make wudu, put them on, or do ghusl and then put them on, and you're good to go for the day. Yeah.
Is that a special sock you're talking about?
Well, they got those wudu socks now. You get online, and they're pretty good.
Last forever. Well, not forever. Last forever.
Yeah, and they're waterproof, and they're pretty good. But as I said, it used to be traditionally, and you can still find those some places. The leather socks, because they're thick, they're strong, and the leather socks are sort of like a shoe. I mean, in a way, just a thin shoe.
But what about going outside? You should be walking outside with them.
Yeah, you can't. They should be strong enough where you can walk outside with them. Yeah.
But don't walk outside with them.
Well, you don't want to get all that dirt on you either. So. What were you saying, Baya?
I was saying about, you mentioned that if you take blood out while you're fasting, that doesn't break your fast, right?
Yeah.
So, but it does break your wudu, right?
Yes. Yeah, so it doesn't break the fast, but it does break the wudu. In Hanafi, it breaks the wudu.
What did you say?
Yeah, like if you give blood, so you take the blood out, like in Hanafi fiqh, if I start bleeding to the extent that the blood kind of runs, like a scratch and it just got a little blood there, yeah, that doesn't break the wudu. But if the blood is, kind of enough to where it's kind of running or dripping, then that breaks the wudu. So if I give blood, well, yeah, there's enough blood that came out that broke the wudu.
How about the fast?
It doesn't break the fast. Yeah.
And the feeding of people for fast, that's only for Muslims, right?
Oh, yeah, the brother's asking, as far as feeding, the poor, as far as fidya for the fast. Yeah, so you should be feeding those that are believers. The poor amongst the believers. We should still help, the non-Muslims as well, but that doesn't compensate for that. That's something we do separately, or should be doing separately. Yeah, and then as far as like the rights of the neighbor, that doesn't matter whether they're Muslim or not Muslim. The rights of the neighbor are the rights of the neighbor. So we need, and Prophet said that, in various ways that, we shouldn't be eating if our neighbor is going hungry. Yusuf.
Yes,
Yeah, did that answer your question?
very much so.
Okay, good.
Jazakallah.
Good. Anything else?
Yeah, I got another. For Hajj, I know you can't, for certain days you can't cut your hair and nails. Is that something like during Ramadan too? You can't do certain things during certain times of Ramadan?
Yeah, he's asking like for Hajj when you're in the ihram, you can't cut your nails, you can't cut your hair, you can't do this. And he's asking if there's anything like that connected to Ramadan, and no. Unless you go for Umrah. So that's, what that is ihram. Ihram is the two-piece dress, the loincloth and the dress, the sheet on top. Ihram is from haram. So, when you don that dress, now many other things that weren't haram for you have become haram. Okay? Because donning that dress means that you have donned the dress of the lover. So when the lover is, at the gate of his beloved, he doesn't remember himself. So he's not going to remember, I got to cut my hair, I got to clip my nails, I got to do this, I got to do that. I mean, all of that. Because he himself no longer exists. His whole focus is on his beloved. So that's why, for the Hajj, and Brother Kyle, inshallah, will be going for Umrah in Ramadan. When you go, again, this whole religion is about love, right? And so the Hajj, being the pinnacle of the actions of the Amal, and the Umrah is a small reflection of the Hajj. So that pinnacle is where the lover is kind of forgotten himself in the love of his beloved. So when you go, that's kind of the attitude that you have to have, or should have. Yeah. Questions? So you were asking about taqwa? Yeah, Brother Kyle was asking about taqwa, and it's something I'm going to talk about in Jummah, inshallah. We got last 4 minutes, so we'll kind of touch upon this briefly. And I literally mean touch upon it briefly right now. We've talked about the law of, or the aspect of abrogation. Okay, and that's verse 106 of Surah Baqarah. ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها أو مثلها ألم تعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. None of our revelations do we abrogate or cause to be forgotten, but we substitute something better or similar. Knowest thou not that Allah hath power over all things? Okay. As far as, and we mentioned this, and I'll mention this at Jummah as well, when the order for fasting came, a aspect, not the whole verse, but an aspect of that verse is abrogated. Okay. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala re-emphasizes something in the Quran, then it's an indication to us that these are things that will not be abrogated. Okay. So when the order comes right away, he also tells us the purpose of fasting. So the purpose of fasting, he says, and when he says, "O you who believe," addressing the believers, fasting prescribes for you as those before you, it says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, that you may learn taqwa. And here he translated, you may learn self-restraint, or you may learn piety or righteousness, or Allah consciousness. And this is how various people translate it, being conscious of Allah. And we'll go into that aspect later on. So that's the very first verse that obligates fasting. When the abrogation came, the interesting thing is, as far as the abrogation takes place in verse 187. So 186, 187, 188, these are the verses that were revealed at the time of the abrogation of the portion of that first verse that is abrogated. But in the end of this verse as well, because the major portion of abrogation how to change the way we fast, in 187, at the end of that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again, He says, لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَّقُونَ, that they may learn self-restraint, or they may learn taqwa. So the purpose of fasting never changed. The way we fast changed, okay, but its purpose remains the same. It was the same now as it was then, and as it will be, down the line. That purpose will never change, and that is to attain taqwa. And having said that, I'm going to end with that, because I didn't, and we'll go into other or meanings of taqwa. Look up the word, and you can see various translations. Okay. But the best translation or the best understanding is what we get from the Quran. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has talked about taqwa in various places in the Quran, and we'll go over that, inshallah. We won't have class next week. I'm going to be out of town. We will resume the following week, which will be, Ramadan will have started by then, inshallah. And then, so we'll kind of pick up some things from there. As I said, this Friday I will go over these verses of Surah Baqarah, and more specifically the abrogation and the beautiful way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abrogates it. As to how they were initially commanded to fast and how we are now commanded to fast, and why the abrogation took place, and again, just the beautiful way that next three set of verses starts out with, which is abused. That verse is so abused by a lot of people, who try to find some way to take the messenger out of everything. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and help us, and so inshallah, we'll, like I said, we'll kind of make salat here and then go, inshallah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you.